Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, August 25th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers finished the preseason 2-1 after a 19-10 victory over the Carolina Panthers on Thursday night in Charlotte. And more importantly than that, roster cut down day is looming. The Steelers have to get their roster down to 53 players by Tuesday. That's tomorrow at 4 p.m. recording this or doing it live if you're here live, obviously, on Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So any news that comes after that, obviously, won't have in this prediction. But Tommy and Shane on our Wednesday show here on the Still Curtain podcast will have the breakdown of all the roster news, trades, cuts, anything that comes out today, tomorrow. They'll take care of all of that on Wednesday. So make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. I'm Josh Yourish, and today we're going to talk about some of the Steelers roster news and things that came out of preseason game number 3. Not going to linger on that too much. It's just it happened Thursday. That's a while ago now. I'll hit on things as I go through my roster projection. But of course, that's the big topic of the day. I'm going to do my 53-man roster projection. You're seeing them all over the place. This is going to be my version and also my analysis on a couple of the most difficult decisions and players that could be trade candidates, anything like that. We'll hit that as we go through the position groups. Before we get to that, though, we have some Steelers preseason news that I feel like is worth getting to, starting with the Derrick Harmon injury and Derrick Harmon sidestepping a potential disaster. Harmon, the Steelers' first-round pick out of Oregon, defensive lineman who has looked really promising through the preseason, was carted off the field in the Steelers' preseason finale in the first half of that game with what seemed like a knee injury, what seemed concerning. Everyone kind of held their breath, and then Harmon walked out onto the field in street clothes, or onto the sideline, not onto the field, in street clothes in the second half, and was joking with Cam Hayward and TJ Watt. And that was promising. That was a little bit of an exhale, but not completely. Maybe they were just trying to cheer him up. It wasn't clear. The reports came out, and it's an MCL sprain for Harmon. He will miss about a month from Thursday when he suffered the injury. It's not going to be exact. He's most likely, almost certainly going to miss week 1, but not going to miss the year, as is always the fear when you see something that could be a knee injury and you see a player carted off like that. So that was a big concern. The Steelers dodged a bullet there, especially after last season losing Troy Fautanu for an entire year and Roman Wilson for an entire year. And the Steelers have continually in this last little stretch seemed to have to redshirt a lot of their rookies, just happenstance and injuries in camp. And there's another rookie who's, kind of looking red shirt eligible at the moment anyways. And we'll get to that as we get to the 53-man roster. That was a big concern because defensive line depth is not stellar. It's a reason the Steelers had to use a first-round pick there. And the top line looks really promising with Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, Harmon, and now even Y.A. Black has entered the chat. He looks great through the preseason, and we'll talk about him more later as well. But beyond that, the depth starts to become a question mark on the defensive line. It's not one of the deepest units in the NFL. It might be the most talented at the top, but probably not one of the deepest. So that's a concern that Harmon's going to miss some time. If there's a stretch that a key defender is going to miss the beginning of the year, A, when everyone else is healthy, and B, when the Steelers go through the softest stretch of the schedule, that's a good sign. That's a positive time for, it's never a great time for an injury, but if they had to position something like this, that's not a bad time. Hopefully it doesn't affect Harmon in terms of his standing on the depth chart or anything getting onto the field. The Steelers can be slow to put rookies out on the field. We saw that with Joey Porter Jr. a couple years ago when Levi Wallace was struggling to no end and the Steelers refused to go to the rookie until late into the season. We've seen it with many other rookies. Mike Tomlin just kind of gives deference to the veteran. But in this case, Harmon was named a starter from pretty much OTAs. Like, it was very clear that Harmon was going to start on the defensive line at 3 technique opposite Cam Hayward. Keanu Benton's going to be the starting nose, and he's who we have to talk about next. So I have to imagine when Harmon gets back healthy, he's going to maybe have a bit of a slow integration in his first week, adjusting to regular season speed, getting back healthy. But after that, Harmon's going to probably be full go, and you feel good about it for the rest of his rookie season. So he dodged a bullet. He did, and the Steelers did. Keanu Benton now, a report from Chris Halleck of DK Sports Pittsburgh, sustained an upper body injury reportedly, and his week 1 status is currently unknown. It seems more likely there hasn't been a lot of talk since this report, one way or the other, about Benton. So it's hard to say definitively he's going to play or he's not going to play, but it doesn't seem like alarms are really being set off in the Steelers South Side facilities, because they certainly would be if the team was going to be without Harmon and without Benton in week 1. So that is, I mean, again, not good news that Benton is dealing with this upper body injury, but it is good news that it doesn't seem to be something that's long term, and there's a good chance he's going to be able to play in week 1. Now, the fallout of these 2 injuries, and while they're not season ending, there still are, ripple effects. One could be with Cam Hayward. He was holding in throughout the end of training camp and through the preseason, wanting a new contract after he got a new deal last year. But, he said that he talked to, when that deal was signed, he said, when I have an all-pro season, I'll be back. And he did have an all-pro season, and he did come back. And then turns out, if you don't get that in writing, it's not great leverage to use against an NFL team. The Steelers have kind of seemed to hold firm that they're not going to give him certainly a new deal, or maybe not even a sweetener. That's not clear. Hayward has since returned to a lot of team activities and is getting ready for week 1. Seemingly, he has threatened to miss games and miss time in search of this new deal or sweeteners or whatever it may be. That hints that maybe something did get done and we're just waiting to hear about it. I know Mark Caboli, when he was on the Fan Morning Show, 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh, today speculated that if Hayward's back practicing, it probably means they got something done and they're just waiting to get the news and for somebody to break that news. I am not one to say Caboli. I mean, he's speculating, but he's better sourced than certainly me or most in the Steelers media. And if he's saying that there's probably something done, I think there's a decent chance that maybe some of the incentives or bonuses for next year are now guaranteed. Like, there are easy ways to sweeten the pot on Hayward's deal and give him a little bit more money. So it seems like that's possible. But if he did want to make a fuss, he certainly has the opportunity with Harmon and Benton both dealing with injuries, because if the Steelers would somehow go into week 1, Benton can't play, Harmon's not playing, and Hayward says, hey, I'm not playing until I get a new deal either. You're looking at Y.A. Black, maybe Isaiah Loudermilk, maybe it's Logan Lee, Daniel Ekwale. Like, it's not a very deep group, and none of those guys are going to go on IR, so you'd be attempting to maybe add an additional defensive lineman in that case to give them a helmet on Sunday. Just wouldn't be a good situation, and gives Hayward a lot of leverage in a potential dispute if he wants to make another fuss. It seems unlikely that that's going to happen now that he's returned to team activities. That just has to happen at some point with Holden. Eventually, you got to get ready for week 1. It seems like Hayward is doing that, but just an opportunity. And I know Tommy wrote about that on stillcurtain.com today. So if you want to go a little more in depth, go check that piece out on the site. Additional fallout of that Like I said, it's a decent spot for Harmon to miss because the schedule is softer early in the season. But the Jets game in week 1 is kind of a must win if the Steelers want to make a playoff push, considering how much more difficult their schedule gets in the second half. Now, it's hard to say that like week 1 is must win if you want to make the playoffs, but that's a game the Steelers, I think the Jets win total is about 5.5. Like that's a game the Steelers have to get because we've seen in years past that the Steelers, unless, Lamar Jackson's hurt or is having some type of weird, crazy game, or, Russell Wilson taps back into the fountain of youth against a terrible Cincinnati defense. We've seen that the Steelers can't really hang with the upper tier contenders in the AFC. And to call Cincinnati that is kind of unfair. But with Joe Burrow, they're always going to be considered somewhere in that realm. And with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and everything that offense is, the Steelers have struggled to play up to that competition and to drag those teams down into the mud as they like to do and try to do. They've struggled to win those games in recent years. So you got to take care of business against a team like the Jets. Just something to think about as those injuries are kind of piling up on the interior defensive line, especially because the Derrick Harmon draft pick and some of the reshuffling on the interior was all with the goal of not giving up 200 plus rushing yards to the Ravens the next time they see them, like they did in the wild card game. And it's if you're making those adjustments for that type of an offense, well, Justin Fields is not Lamar Jackson, but he is one of the better rushing quarterbacks in the NFL, and you're going to just be facing that 11-man run game. Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, two big physical running backs that give kind of different looks and are going to be in a bit of a committee there, it sounds like. That's certainly what the fantasy football guys everywhere are starting to expect, is Breece Hall is kind of falling down fantasy football draft boards. If you want some fantasy insight, there's a little bit of it. Maybe take a flyer on Braylon Allen and stay away from Breece Hall. But either way, that team's going to be running the ball a lot. And okay, now your interior defensive line is potentially without Benton, certainly without Harmon. And maybe Cam Hayward wants to force his way into a new deal. It's a good opportunity to do it. So that's just something. We have a long time to go until we're preparing for that game. I'll have another show next week, either on Monday or Tuesday. Not sure yet because Labor Day is on Monday. I'll have to see how things shake out with college football and things like that. For me, writing wise, that's behind the scenes. But just to give you an update, I will have a show next week. And obviously, Tommy and Shane will leading into the first game of the season. So something that we'll have more information on then, but is just worth thinking about. Next piece of news. The Steelers made their first round of cuts. It's not like it used to be in the NFL where there are like multiple rounds of a cut down and it's progressive. Now it's just on Tuesday, tomorrow by 4 p.m. Eastern. Every team has to beat a 53. You don't have to make any cuts before that, but the Steelers did. They cut 11 players coming out of the final preseason game. Kenny Wilkes, Cam Alexander, Quindell Johnson, Kyler McMichael, Mikey Victor, Doug Nestor, Julian Pearl, Logan Woodside, Evan Hall, Kevin Felsch, and Jake McQuaid, the long snapper. So those are the names. None of those players were remotely in the mix to make the team. I can't imagine any of them were really in the mix to make the practice squad either. Those are the first round of cuts. The Steelers still have plenty more to make as they try to get to 53. So now is a good chance to jump into our 53-man roster prediction. Before I do that, as I already mentioned, but I'm going to say it again, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Steel Curtain podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. You can find the podcast on Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts as well, but we really appreciate it on YouTube specifically. So you can see our live shows. I'm live Mondays at 1:30. Tommy and Shane are live Wednesdays at 1:30 Eastern as well. And then throughout the season, I'm going to be doing instant reactions after every Steelers game. So a lot to look forward to as the season approaches. All right. With that out of the way, let's just dive headfirst into this roster prediction for the 53-man roster for the Steelers and the quarterback position, which has quickly become one of the most interesting ones. I have the Steelers keeping 3. Certainly they will. They almost always do. And especially now that you have an emergency quarterback and you don't have to give them a helmet on Sundays, but they can still play. The Steelers are going to keep 3 quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, and I have the Steelers keeping Skylar Thompson as well. You can see it if you're on the YouTube. Up on the graphic, Skylar Thompson was excellent in preseason. He played well against the Panthers again. I talked about it earlier, but this is a player that has started an NFL playoff game. He started games for Mike McDaniel in Miami and just looked comfortable on an NFL football field. It's the preseason against preseason players. I don't think he'd look nearly as comfortable in the regular season or if he got another postseason start. But just acquitted himself really nicely and went from, oh, this guy's just a camp arm that the Steelers, have left over from last season, to, all right, Will Howard's hurt and Skylar Thompson has just been impossible to ignore. So I think he gets the roster spot. Jerry Dulac speculated, I think it was more speculation, but he went on WDVE this morning and talked about how the Steelers are likely to put Will Howard on IR, designated to return, and going to keep Skylar Thompson. So that would give them at least a month on that, about 4-week IR. That could go longer, at least a month with Thompson on the roster while they try to get Howard up to speed. I think there's a school of thought that if you just keep Howard on long-term IR and essentially redshirt him for the season, that might be the better way to go, because what reps is Will Howard really going to get throughout the season, right? What reps are you going to be able to get him ready to play if he has to? And if the Steelers, this is always the case with a backup quarterback, right? Like the Colts in the past, I think this is the example that everyone kind of uses, the Tony Dungy Colts with Peyton Manning. Never really valued the backup quarterback position, and that thought process has changed as the Eagles have considered it like one of the most valuable positions on the roster and make quarterback moves every year. But the thought was, well, if Peyton Manning goes down, it doesn't matter who our QB2 is, we're screwed. And the Steelers aren't in that situation because Aaron Rodgers isn't who Aaron Rodgers once was, 4-time MVP. But if he goes down and Mason Rudolph goes down, the Steelers are probably screwed. So it doesn't really matter. But I think it's interesting that Skylar Thompson has played this well. He's still in his late 20s, right? I think he's somebody who's played himself into an additional 3, 4, 5 years of a career because of this preseason. Because that's kind of all it takes, right? You just impress enough to be able to hold a clipboard for a little bit. And if things break right for you, all right, you're a career backup now. And he's already kind of been that. I don't see any upside beyond that. But from my evaluation of Will Howard coming out of Ohio State, I would, if I had to start either of them in a game this year, I'm certainly starting Skylar Thompson. And it's just a funny thing that NFL teams do with the quarterback position, especially backup quarterbacks. You draft one mid to late rounds, you develop him behind your starter for a couple years. Maybe he gets a start, maybe he doesn't really get a lot of opportunities. And then he comes to the end of that rookie contract. You don't really know what you have. You haven't really given him a ton of a chance to get better, but he's certainly better than he was. And then you just cut bait and go for another young guy, right? That's kind of the cycle of it. Unless you're the Steelers and your fan base falls in love with Mason Rudolph. And for some reason, he's somebody that the whole town can't quit. But that's essentially the cycle. And now Skylar Thompson is on the other end of that. He was the mid to late round pick and got a couple of opportunities in Miami. Now he's gotten better, and now he's not really going to have a chance to play because he's no longer the young guy who you have the hope you're wish casting into a starter. And now we're doing that with Will Howard, another former Kansas State quarterback. I would just rather probably have Skylar Thompson. I don't see any future of Will Howard as a starting quarterback in the NFL, even really as a plus backup in the NFL. I don't think the mobility is there. I think that's one of his best strengths, was one of his best strengths at the college level, being like a physical kind of power runner. I know it was one of his best strengths with Chip Kelly calling that offense at Ohio State. That's how they closed out a lot of games, particularly the Penn State game with Will Howard just barreling down at them. He does not have that type of size advantage or athletic advantage at this level. I don't think he's a particularly accurate thrower. I think he can win at the college level when he has Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, like great receivers who are going to be first round picks in this year's and next year's NFL draft. And Emeka Egbuka and more. So I'd be fine with the Steelers just flat keeping Skylar Thompson, right? You'd try to, if you can keep Will Howard on the IR, and that's perfect. Redshirt him, that's perfect. If you can sneak him to practice squad, which you probably couldn't because somebody else would wish cast him, then I would be okay with it, right? I'm not going to lose any sleep over that because I don't see any future of Will Howard being a meaningful NFL quarterback. And right now I'm seeing Skylar Thompson, while you don't want to overact to preseason, being a somewhat competent backup arm, right? And I know he clears that level of competence right now. I don't know that about Will Howard. And to some people, that's all potential. Okay, yeah, you take the shot with the unknown. And generally that's the right thing to do, right? That's best practice because what if? But I think your what if for Will Howard is to look as good as Skylar Thompson has in this preseason, right? It's the mystery box thing, the Family Guy reference that everyone kind of uses now. The what if it's a boat? There's a boat in a mystery box, and Peter Griffin picks the mystery box and says it could be anything. It could even be a boat, right? It's the same thing. But ultimately, they're going to find it seems like they might find a way to keep both. Tomlin today after practice said that Howard is looking close to returning to full participation. So that's news. That's meaningful. That probably means not long-term IR for Howard with that broken hand, broken pinky, maybe whatever it was. But I've been impressed enough with Skylar Thompson to think that Will Howard will never is strong, but probably might not even reach the level that Thompson had played at in this preseason. So I would just keep Thompson around and take your chances on Howard. But if you can keep both, all right, do that. Like, I totally understand the thought process there. That's just my 2 cents on backup quarterbacks and how this cycle kind of churns them out. And if you get a couple good starts, you're a career backup. And if you don't really get an opportunity, you just fizzle into nothing. Okay. Running backs. A little long on quarterbacks for a team that is ideally playing Aaron Rodgers all year and has a fairly solidified backup in Mason Rudolph. But nonetheless, felt it was interesting to talk about. Now the running backs. I have the Steelers keeping 3. And this is an interesting conversation and something that I went back and forth on and actually changed and need to update in my next graphic. But I want the Steelers to keep Lou Nichols as the 4th running back because I was just really impressed with his explosiveness, his power, his vision. He looked like an NFL running back against backups. Yes. But he looked different than Evan Hall. He looked different than Trey Sermon, right? I've seen some roster projections with the Steelers keeping Trey Sermon. I don't think there's much purpose to that. I know he has more utility on special teams than a Lou Nichols does, but I think you can get a guy like Lou Nichols up to speed in that area, right? I would just take the chance on somebody I view as a more dynamic runner who could potentially be in a position to be a future backup or something at the running back position. That's a spot I would actually take a swing on the upside. I just really like what Nichols has done through the preseason. I think he's been the most effective of the other running backs, the non-Jalen Warren, Caleb Johnson, Kenneth Gainwell category. Of course, those are the 3 I have the Steelers projected to keep. On the running back position, I think Johnson, especially when the starting offensive line was out there for the Steelers, looked better again, looked more decisive, more downhill. You saw the vision, you saw a pitch play when he was able to just pick his spot and one cut and go. And that's such his strength. I think you've seen it each week kind of build and less of the athletic hubris that you have as a college star running back, where you think you can bounce a lot of things and take more chances. And now at the NFL, you just got to take what's there. I think we saw him do that at a pretty high level. I was impressed with it, but I also think that it's very clear Jaylen Warren is going to be RB1 on this team, if not for the entire year, for most of it. I came into the season thinking, or the preseason thinking Caleb Johnson, and again, I'm trying not to overreact to preseason, thinking that Jaylen Warren was eventually going to fade into the 1A, 1B role behind Caleb Johnson's 1A, with Johnson just being more physical and able to handle the workload and such a good fit for the running game that Arthur Smith wants to use. But how they handled Jaylen Warren and the pop he showed, though he, had some ball security issues in the preseason finale, but the pop he showed when he finally did get out there, it's why I was excited about him. It's why I always wanted him to get the lion's share of the carries when Najee Harris was here. So I'm happy for Jaylen Warren to get, more carries if they don't feel like Caleb Johnson is ready for that type of workload. All right, perfect. Preserve Johnson a little bit until you feel like he is ready for that role. And then you run the wheels off of him, and you run the wheels off of Jaylen Warren, who's, nearing the end of his contract with the Steelers. That's how you should handle the running back position in the NFL. The NFLPA is not going to love that, but I think that's the right philosophy to have, to kind of churn through these guys and get the best years out of them while you can, while they're cost controlled, and then move on. So yeah, I like that group. Gainwell is somebody that they're pretty high on for his pass catching and pass protection and that type of stuff. And as an RB3, perfectly fine, right? That's great. I would like for Lou Nichols to make this team, but I don't think he will. At wide receiver, I think this is maybe a more interesting one than running back, because at least the top three is completely clear for the running back position. Taking a bit of a swing on this projection, though. And this is the one I had to update because I was taking Lou Nichols off. I originally had Lou Nichols on, took him off. I think the Steelers maybe keep 6 wide receivers. And I really hope the math adds up now that I was kind of scrambling and changing things up. But nonetheless, and if it doesn't and I screwed things up, then Brandon Johnson is the one that we're not going to include. But he's the 6th wide receiver that I have the Steelers keeping potentially in this projection. 6 wide receivers: DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin III, Ben Skoranek, Scotty Miller, and Brandon Johnson. Robert Woods is obviously the hot topic because he would be the one getting cut here. He's been playing deep into preseason games and just looks completely cooked. He's not standing out in the fourth quarter of preseason games against third and fourth stringers and guys, undrafted guys who aren't going to get a cup of coffee in the regular season. Robert Woods had a great career. I think it's just done. I think it's completely done. And Tomlin is typically going to give some deference to the veterans. And I think Robert Woods theoretically is a pretty good fit for Arthur Smith's scheme that does rely a lot on, condensed formations and wide receivers being important blockers in the run game as you run the outside zone and the stretch zone stuff. And Robert Woods has been really good at that in the past. He's just not, he's in his mid-30s now, and I just think it's gone. I think the explosiveness isn't there, and there's not going to be much as a pass catcher. And yes, it would be nice to have him as kind of that scheme fit, especially for his run blocking ability, but you have Ben Skoranek to do that. So if you're going to have somebody out there who's just a blocker, have Ben Skoranek who's much better at it, right? Because their Steelers are kind of pulling the old McVay guys and the old outside zone guys like Skoranek and Robert Woods, who both are formerly McVay guys with the Rams. If you're going to do that, you're keeping Skoranek anyways. He's just a much better fit in that role. So I think that's a cut. I think if the Steelers do end up keeping 6, Brandon Johnson makes more sense than Robert Woods, also because he's a slightly bigger receiver. He's a theoretical X, where Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin are slots and Z's and more undersized guys. You could theoretically put Brandon Johnson in something of a DK Metcalf role and be more maybe of a sacrificial X that's just, you're running for the love of the game routes, but you fit the body type there more. You're a bit more redundant in that place. And I think he looked good in the preseason. So I would be interested in that if the Steelers keep 6 and if the Steelers don't add some other veteran on the waiver wire or via a trade or anything. The Minnesota Vikings were trying to trade for Adam Thielen of the Panthers over the weekend. They weren't able to pry him away. So clearly the Panthers are valuing Thielen. There was a connection between the Steelers and Thielen. He was a potential trade prospect last offseason, I believe. So maybe there's something there. He's not the fit I would like as much as if Tim Patrick gets cut by the Lions. I think that's pretty interesting. He's somebody who was really promising before he missed back-to-back seasons with devastating knee injuries in Denver. That's certainly a problem. That's on the resume. But last year with Detroit, he was pretty impressive. He's another like outside vertical guy who could make more sense in that wide receiver 1, that X role that DK Metcalf is going to fill if DK Metcalf misses time. Because it's not going to make as much sense to slide Calvin Austin or slide Roman Wilson into running those routes. Physically, it's not a match. So I think Tim Patrick could be a little bit closer to that and would be if he's cut veteran guy I'd be interested in more than a Gabe Davis who was visited with the Steelers and may not even pass a physical after he was cut by the Jaguars and looked really cooked last year as well. So generally, I'm not so interested in the Steelers like adding another veteran because I think especially one that would be a wide receiver 2 or something, because you have to get answers on Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, especially with theoretically more competent quarterback play than the Steelers have gotten in the past couple of years with Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. I think the quarterback play will be slightly above that level, not astronomically better, but you'll get a better evaluation on Austin, and you'll certainly get a look at Roman Wilson, especially in the current role he's in, where he might be the wide receiver 2. Once Austin gets healthy, I think it'll probably be Austin who gets the second most targets of Steelers wide receivers. But either way, you just need answers on those guys. Who's going to be an actual long-term fit as you get your next franchise quarterback? So to have an Adam Thielen taking targets away from them just doesn't make any sense to me, especially when this team is not looking like a Super Bowl contender. But adding a Tim Patrick, he's not really going to eat into Roman Wilson's target share or Calvin Austin's target share. He's somebody who could just make more sense as a 6th guy. And, the only person I haven't mentioned on this, Scotty Miller, he just played his way onto the team in the preseason and looked really good. He has a lot of speed from the slot and is like this vertical slot stretcher, and that's what the Steelers want Roman Wilson to be. I like the redundancy there. Like, I like that if Wilson's out and Calvin Austin's out, they're all kind of the same player, similar version, maybe slightly different versions of the same player, right? Like, I think Roman Wilson is probably the best sitting down in zones and like over the middle of the field of those speedy slot guys. Calvin Austin is probably the best true vertical stretcher and maybe the most ideal option on the outside because of that. And then Scotty Miller is more of the shifty underneath, more traditional, though he has the field stretching ability. So they're all like kind of a fit that makes sense where you can plug them into different roles, have them running different types of routes from the slot, from the outside. I don't hate that in the way Scotty Miller's played with the options that the Steelers have at wide receiver. You absolutely just have to have him on this roster. At tight end, as we roll through the offense, I don't think there's much discussion to be had here. I've talked about the tight ends a lot. I think the tight end position is going to be potentially the Steelers' greatest strength on offense, not just because of the depth of talent here, but because of the different ways they can use multiple of them all at the same time. Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, keeping 4. That makes sense. Hayward has versatility. He's a special team star. He's potentially a fullback. He can be a running back. Jonnu Smith can even take some carries out of the backfield. So I think you can justify keeping all of those guys. especially if you're keeping 3 running backs, you need another potential ball carrier. And I think you have 2 from that group. I definitely, Connor Hayward's the only one in question, in any doubt from this group. And I certainly think the Steelers end up keeping him. Offensive tackle, I broke it up, offensive tackle and interior. With Calvin Anderson injured, I have the Steelers keeping 3, Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, and Dylan Cook as the swing tackle. I think where it gets interesting is on the interior offensive line. Obviously, Sayamalu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Spencer Anderson. Those all feel like sure things. Ryan McCollum, probably because you need another center, a backup option behind Zach Frazier. And I don't know, none of those other options really have center ability. So Ryan McCollum is probably going to be the answer there. And then I have the Steelers keeping Andrews Pete as well, because over Max Sharping, like that's kind of the dispute, I guess, especially if Calvin Anderson is on IR going into the year. I think the tackle versatility is going to be enticing. And then the veteran proven player, he's certainly on the back 9 if he's still out on the golf course at all. But I think that the Steelers have put him at left tackle enough in the preseason to trust him at left tackle and left guard, and that the versatility there is going to be enticing. The more interesting conversation is probably about the fact that the Steelers just don't have a whole lot of offensive line depth. And last year, there was a ton of offensive line depth. The Steelers withstood massive injuries that should have been like season derailing. And in some ways, the offense sputtered and kind of fell apart down the stretch. A lot of that was Russell Wilson created, but the offensive line was not really that big of a disaster, right? You lost Troy Fautanu for the year. You lost Isaac Seumalo for a stretch. You lost James Daniels for the year. You lost Nate Herbig for the season in the preseason. Like there were a ton of offensive line injuries that thrust Mason McCormick into a starting role, that kept Broderick Jones on the right side and not as the swing tackle, with Dan Moore beating him out at left tackle. The Steelers have no chance of withstanding that level of injury this year. It would be a disaster, a complete disaster, especially with 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers back there. So the Steelers better hope for some good injury luck up front, because things could fall apart quickly if they don't get it. On to the defensive side of the ball. A little quick drink for me. Apologies for the delay. Running solo, sometimes the mouth is just going to get dry. All right. We're staying in the trenches. We're starting in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. And we're looking at the defensive line. And this is a position group, obviously, I talked about a lot at the top. I think they're keeping 6. I think it's going to be Cam Hayward, Derrick Harmon, Keanu Benton, Y.A. Black. None of those players are in question at all. Isaiah Loudermilk, I think, gets the nod over Logan Lee, though it's worth a discussion. And then Daniel Ekwale. On the Logan Lee thing, I think what he showed as the emergency long snapper, especially with Christian Kuntz seeming to be starting the season with that sternum injury, that's a bit concerning. That, okay, maybe he re-injures this thing and you need an answer there. Logan Lee has already proven it. I'm sure they have another answer on who they're going to keep as the 53 man. But that would be something I would point to if he does ultimately get the nod there. I think you're kind of splitting hairs over a positional battle that is not going to be that meaningful, because I don't think either are all that talented of players. Like, we've seen what Isaiah Loudermilk is. He's a body. The Steelers like those length and strength guys on the defensive line. He certainly has the length, but it hasn't translated. It hasn't developed into much. But I think the known commodity, maybe after Logan Lee missed all of last year with an injury, maybe you just give him the nod that way. In terms of the people that the Steelers are actually keeping on this defensive line, Y.A. Black looks like a star. He had 2 sacks in the preseason finale. He was disruptive. He was all over the place. He's just eating guards alive. His massive frame, like we talked about coming out of the draft and everything, when the Steelers said they're going to use him at 3 technique and keep Keanu Benton at nose. You got to flip those two, especially with Y.A. Black's body type. Like he's a plugger. He's a Casey Hampton. He's a nose. He can do both. He will do both and he can do both. He is shown a lot more as a pass rusher than we saw from him at Iowa. It's just been a super, super impressive preseason. And again, this is something I've talked about in a year plus of doing this show. This is really the solution for becoming a contender for any team, but especially to get out of the middle, right? A lot of teams go to get out of the middle, they go to the bottom first, right? Because then you have better, more premium draft picks. You can build up draft capital. The Steelers are building up draft capital. They're doing it a different way with compensatory picks and things, some trades, but they're not bottoming out. So it's difficult to go from the middle just up. That's hard in all sports, especially sports with, a reverse order draft and salary caps and whatnot. Really, the only way to do it, especially if you're not taking a massive swing at quarterback or, quarterback changes everything, but you just have to hit on so many draft picks, including late round ones, right? You just have to keep hitting on them because it gives you so much more leeway at the quarterback position to either develop a somewhat flawed player, right? The Eagles are one of the best drafting teams in the league and have been since Howie Roseman got back into that job. And they've, been to multiple Super Bowls, won multiple Super Bowls. And a lot of that is just like hitting on these top picks and mid-round picks and just getting over expected value there. And it has allowed them to win a Super Bowl with Nick Foles and then bring Jalen Hurts along, who is, in my opinion, somewhat of an underrated player, but is certainly limited as a passer. You can develop him to the point where you're blowing out the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And he looks great doing it, and you have the roster to cover up any deficiencies that he has. That's just great drafting. And it's great drafting for the Lions, right, who did bottom out. That's the reason they turn things around, right? You fix the culture in Dan Campbell, but you also just start hitting on draft picks. It's the same, but it's even the same for the Rams when they F them picks and won the Super Bowl anyways. They were hitting on late round guys like crazy. Like drafting was a huge part of the success of the F them picks team because of the picks they hit on earlier in the franchise's history and became centerpieces, but also on the late round guys that they were plugging holes with. A lot of it just in football comes down to great drafting. So that's an overly simplistic way to talk about roster construction. But to get out of the middle, you have to keep hitting on these guys. And that's early round, that's mid round, and then that's especially late round, in my opinion, because those picks are easier to get. You can build up the quantity of them. And if you are hitting on them, expected value, like that's plus expected value because you're just not expecting much contribution from a 6th round pick. But Y.A. Black looks like somebody who can be an absolute starter and maybe even a stud in the NFL. He's so disruptive and been difficult to deal with as a pass rusher, but also just tips and deflections. And the Steelers are already great at that. Cam Hayward's great at that. TJ Watt's great at that. But Y.A. Black is going to be a weapon in that regard because of his length at 6'6", and just he's done that throughout training camp. We've seen some of it in the preseason. Then he also is somebody who occupies multiple blockers in the run game and allows your linebackers to fly around because guards and centers aren't getting up to the second level. Like he's everything you want out of that exact body type and specific type of defensive tackle. So I absolutely looks like that's a steal in the draft. And that's how the Steelers have to continue to try to build this thing upwards from where they are in kind of the NFL purgatory. So great return, great early returns on Y.A. Black. His best performance was in the preseason finale. Looks like he's going to get a huge opportunity in week 1 with Derrick Harmon out, because I imagine it'll be Hayward, Benton, if he's healthy enough to go, as the primary 3 tech, and then the nose. And then when there's a third interior defensive lineman out there, I imagine it's going to mostly be Y.A. Black. Obviously, it's a rotation, but I think he's going to get a lot of run in week 1, and that's interesting and promising. Something a little less promising, one of the Steelers' deepest position groups, the outside linebacker room. The Steelers almost always keep 4. I imagine that's the case this year. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, Jack Sawyer at outside linebacker. Sawyer's the topic here. The Steelers know what they're getting from Watt and Highsmith and Herbig. I think Herbig can be even more impactful this year. He's going to be somebody that if the Steelers don't keep him around and convert him into a full-time starter, he's going to sign an under market free agent deal and become an absolute stud, and maybe not a 3-down guy, but like a late down rusher in a edge rotation. And everyone's going to be like, what were the Steelers hiding? He's just so good. And if he is healthy and can stay healthy, I think he'll be fantastic this year. And maybe even kind of push Highsmith for some snaps, because I'm maybe more interested in seeing Herbig out there, especially as a pass rusher. A little undersized against the run, but I think he plays it well. The conversation is Jack Sawyer. It's also DeMarvin Leal a little bit. Leal was better in the preseason finale, but he's just been a tweener, right? He's too big to be an edge. He doesn't have the speed to be a pass rushing edge. And he doesn't have the physicality to be a 3 technique. So he's not a fit with the Steelers. He's probably a fit in the NFL. I think he's an NFL player. Former 3rd-round pick, former 5-star recruit. Like, there's pedigree there. So he's certainly a trade candidate, if not just outright cut, somebody who I think would get claimed on waivers pretty quickly. But just not a fit here. Like, he's somebody I would like to see the Steelers move on from, so he can get into a better system as a 4-3 defensive end, and for rundowns and things like that. Like, I just think that's a much better fit for him. Jack Sawyer. He hasn't been particularly impressive this preseason. I think he was certainly better in the preseason finale. I think with Sawyer, it's going to take a little bit of time. He's not overly quick. He's not overly strong. It's got to be, with every edge rusher, it's converting speed to power, right? That's something Von Miller recently talked about in an interview. Like, he has his ghost move and all these different moves. Ultimately, the way you get to the quarterback is you convert speed to power, right? That's pretty much everything as an edge rusher, and bend. And, TJ Watt has all of that in spades. Jack Sawyer, not quite as much, but he does have physical abilities. Like, this is a former 5-star who was very productive at Ohio State. Last year at Ohio State, I think I mentioned this throughout the offseason, but if not, last year at Ohio State, the defensive line was not overly disruptive. It was Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, another former 5-star, another senior who's now in the NFL. They're 2 edge rushers, along with Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams on the inside, both NFL players as well. That defensive line should have been one of the most dominant in the NFL, or in college football. By the end of the season, it was, but it wasn't initially, because Sawyer and Tuimoloau kind of were rushing a little bit too finesse, right? We're getting a little too wide. They're not the bendiest guys, but they were kind of trying to play like a Bosa brother, something like that have come out of Ohio State. And Jim Knowles, their defensive coordinator, and Ryan Day was reportedly kind of instructive in this case, got them to just rush more of a straight line at the quarterback, right? Just kind of rush with more power, more directly at the quarterback, instead of taking the wide lane and giving step-up lanes and whatnot. And they became a dominant unit, and it kind of clicked for Sawyer. And I think they're are going to have to be those growing pains at this level. He's certainly somebody as a 4th-round pick that you're going to keep on this roster. And you hope that the power starts to come. That he can be more of a run defending edge who's not a tweener like Leal. He's true, like he fits as an outside linebacker in the system. But who's more of a physical rundown guy and more of a power rusher. And I think that can probably come as he gets his bearings, as he builds his strength in an NFL program. Not that the strength program at Ohio State, I mean, that's pretty much an NFL program, but I think the development can come. I've seen some promising signs. I think the preseason finale was his best, and that's what you want to see from Sawyer, from Caleb Johnson, from a lot of these guys, Y.A. Black, that have talked about the preseason finale was maybe their best performance. That's what you want to see, that as they're getting comfortable playing against NFL players, they're figuring out where they can win, what their strengths are, what they can't get away with. And I think that'll come for Sawyer. So I'm still intrigued by it. And he's certainly somebody you can feel comfortable carrying when you have TJ Watt, you have Alex Highsmith, and you have Nick Herbig, because how much is he really going to be working into that rotation, especially early in the season? All right. Middle linebacker, inside linebacker, whatever we want to call it. Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Cole Holcomb, Malik Harrison, and Mark Robinson. I think they keep 5. This seems to be where everybody's going with this, that the Steelers are going to keep 5 middle linebackers and that it's going to be Mark Robinson and not Carson Bruner, the 7th-round pick. Bruner needed to be a special teams ace, and he's, made some tackles, made some plays on special teams. I don't think there's enough there right now. And I think Mark Robinson, who is somebody I was really excited about when he first burst onto the scene as a late round pick. I think he was a 7th-round pick in 2023, 2022. If I'm not mistaken about the round, I'm probably mistaken about the year, but he's in the final year of his rookie contract. I was really excited about him because he's converted safety, who just new to the position, flies around, hits really hard. I think we've seen less of that just heat-seeking missile play from him, but that's also better because he's just playing more in control and understanding the position better. He's shown a lot of growth. It seems like he certainly has the edge over Bruner, and with Malik Harrison being a free agent signing that it seems like they want to keep, Cole Holcomb getting healthier, it makes sense for this group to keep 5, to kind of see how this group of a lot of veterans and Peyton Wilson kind of figures things out and shakes out in terms of a rotation throughout the year. I imagine they keep 5 here. And I like the decision to keep Robinson because he's somebody who the Steelers knew would take time to develop. And now it's happening. And there's that tendency again to go, well, but there's another new young guy. And what if he could develop? Let's see what Mark Robinson develops into. I think it takes a long time in the modern NFL, especially where inside linebackers are victimized constantly with play action, with outside zone running. Now that they've gotten lighter with more gap scheme, power running, and giant offensive guards getting to the second level and bullying them, like that is one of the most attacked positions on the field. And it takes a while to adjust to it. It takes a while, even for top picks, to get their bearings. A guy like Devin Bush is kind of coming around a little bit with the Browns. Not that he's ever going to be an impactful player, but it just takes a while. So it's worthwhile keeping Mark Robinson on the roster, in my opinion. At cornerback, Jalen Ramsey, Joey Porter Jr., Darius Slay, Brandon Eccles, James Pierre, and then the question mark is Beanie Bishop Jr. I think as of right now, they'll probably keep Beanie. He showed a lot of ball skills. He made a lot of plays last year. I don't think he's great in coverage. He's an undersized nickel only, and that's a concern. But I think he's the type of player that they like. They like to develop those kind of guys. It's probably either him or Corey Trice, because I think Pierre as a gunner on special teams, I think they like him enough there to keep him. So it's probably Bishop or Trice, and just Trice, too many injuries. So I would keep Bishop. I could see them taking a swing on maybe the upside of Trice's length, everything they've liked about him, but it's another injury. Like he came in with injury problems. That's why he slipped to the 6th, 7th round. And now that's borne itself out in the NFL, right? Like he's continued to have injury problems. So I think that's probably the way they go. But the concern is if Ramsey is your primary nickel with Slay and Porter Jr. staying on the outside, right? In base, Ramsey and probably Porter Jr. on the outside, maybe Slay. When you go to nickel, which is almost all the time when you're in sub package, Ramsey slides inside, Porter Jr. and Slay on the outside. I like that. I love that. Your primary backup at nickel, if Ramsey has to go to the outside or if he's out with injury, probably Brandon Eccles because he can play inside and out and he's been really good in preseason. And then Pierre's a guy who is mostly outside only. Trice can do a little bit of both if he's ever on the field. Bishop can't go outside. So are you keeping somebody who's a nickel only and he's your third nickel? That becomes a bit difficult to justify. So that's going to be the one I'm going to look most intently at because I think it says a lot about how they intend to use Jalen Ramsey. Are they willing to potentially move him to safety if they have to? Just what are the plan? What is the plan at cornerback? Because it's such a new look group with Slay coming in, Ramsey coming in, and even Eccles all being new faces. Beanie Bishop is somebody that they counted on a lot last year, and he while there were mixed results, he showed the ball skills and showed a lot of things that you would wanted to see from an undrafted free agent. But now he could legitimately be in danger of not making this 53 man. At safety, think it's 4. It's really 3. Deshaun Elliott, Juan Thornhill, probably Chuck Clark, and Miles Killebrew is certainly going to make this team. Why I say it's really 3 is because Killebrew is pretty much only a goal line safety, and he's a special teams ace. So he's not really going to play safety, like true safety, very often. He's in their goal line packages quite a bit as a bigger box safety if you need to keep somebody out there with some coverage skills. And maybe even that isn't a role he fits in as much if they're keeping 5 middle linebackers, inside linebackers. Maybe Mark Robinson makes more sense in that situation. But anyways, I like this group. I like what I've seen from Thornhill. I don't know what his ceiling is, but if you're going to have a weak link on the defense, having it at safety, that's probably the best place. That's the toughest to expose, especially with defenses playing more and more too high safety. I think you can cover up for a deficiency there better than ever in the NFL. So Thornhill being that deep safety, that free safety, and Elliott being able to play box safety or free safety and like having that versatility is valuable, especially because Chuck Clark is pretty much a box only safety. Like he's a strong safety. He's not really going to be a center fielder. I don't love that position group. I think it's the weakest on the roster, but I think that's what it's going to look like when we get to cut down tomorrow. And then the specialists. Boswell, Corliss Waitman, Christian Kuntz. It seems like Kuntz is going to be good to go in week 1, and they're going to keep him as a long snapper. The interesting thing is Waitman or Cameron Johnston. I think Waitman has some value as a left-footed punter. I think he was impressive last year and reliable. You know a little bit more of what you have. Like I think Johnston was really impressive last year in the preseason before he suffered his injury. And it's unfortunate that he kind of is maybe getting Wally pipped a little bit, but he'll land on his feet. He'll find a job. He's one of the certainly, I think the Steelers have 2 of the 20 best punters in the NFL, probably. So I would lean keeping Waitman, maybe just a bit of familiarity and certainty, and look for a trade partner for Cameron Johnston, as the Steelers did 2 years ago when they kept 2 punters. I think there's a chance they keep 2 on cutdown day as they seek a trade partner for one of them. And maybe if you can get an offer for one and not for the other, that makes the decision for you, right? Maybe some other team makes the decision for you. I would lean Waitman right now, but that's one that's too close to call and maybe a little unnecessary too. overemphasize because the Steelers have an answer there now after years of suffering with Presley Harvin and that just being kind of a disastrous situation, him being one of the worst punters in the NFL. Now the Steelers can feel confident in that position. There it is. Took an hour. I wasn't sure at all how long we were going to take getting through that. Went a full hour pretty much. I mean, some of the news at the beginning, probably, I guess, 45 minutes on the roster projection. A lot to talk about with these different battles, different decisions the Steelers have to make, what they value. We're going to learn all of it tomorrow, maybe today, tomorrow. And then Tommy and Shane are going to break it all down on Wednesday. When they have the full 53-man roster, they get a look at it, and we can start to set our sights on week 1 of the NFL season. I cannot wait for it. I know if you're listening, you probably can't wait for it either. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast to be with us all year long. Like I said, I'm going to be doing instant reactions after the games, Monday show, Wednesday show. We're going to have it all for you here on the Still Curtain podcast and the Still Curtain YouTube page. That'll be it for me today. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Yourish3. I always forget to plug that, but I would really appreciate some some followers there. If you're on Blue Sky, that's where I'm most active. And that'll do it for the show. As always, have a good week and go Steelers.